I'm Nate, and when I was 14, my parents abandoned me at my grandmother's house. It sounds harsh, but that's exactly what happened. Growing up, I had my fair share of challenges. I was diagnosed with epilepsy at a young age, which made life difficult not just for me, but for my parents as well. They were never emotionally or mentally prepared to handle it, and it showed in how they treated me. By the time I was 6, I could already see the difference in how they treated me compared to my older brother Sean, who was 3 years older than me. Sean was the golden child, the easy one who never caused them trouble. Meanwhile, I was the kid with health issues that made everything harder. When I turned 8, I was diagnosed with dyslexia and severe ADHD on top of the epilepsy. It was like the final nail in the coffin of my relationship with my parents. They were overwhelmed, and instead of rising to the challenge, they withdrew. They never said it outright, but I always felt like they regretted having me. It was as if they expected another perfect kid like Sean and weren't prepared for anything else. The way they treated me made that clear. They didn't show affection or encouragement. Instead, they made me feel like a burden they had to tolerate. When I'd walk into a room, they'd stop talking and the air would get heavy. It was like my presence sucked the life out of them. I was under 10, but I already understood that I wasn't wanted. As I grew older, things only got worse. By the time I hit my teenage years, my mental health was in shambles. I started acting out, not just because of my conditions, but because I felt trapped in a home that didn't want me. My rebellion was my way of screaming for attention. I stopped caring about school and intentionally flunked classes, which only led to more disappointment from my parents. They barely reacted anymore, as if they were too tired to care. It frustrated me to no end. Even when I pushed the boundaries, they wouldn't respond in any meaningful way. They'd just sigh, roll their eyes, and mutter that I was having a fit again. One day, when I was 14, I crossed a line. I brought a pack of cigarettes to school and lit one in the middle of class. When my teacher demanded that I stop and leave the room, I flipped him off. That was the last straw. I'd already been labelled a troublemaker, but this time was different. The school expelled me, and for once my parents reacted. They were furious, and they said things that are etched into my memory forever. That day, they unleashed every resentment they'd ever harboured. They told me they regretted having me, that if they'd known I'd be a psychotic kid, they would have terminated the pregnancy. They called me a burden and said they were better off when they only had Sean. It hurt more than anything I'd experienced before. It wasn't news to me that they didn't love me, but hearing it out loud was like a dagger to the heart. After that, they locked me in my room for a week. I wasn't allowed out except for bathroom breaks, and they brought my meals to the door. It was like solitary confinement, but worse, because it was my parents who were doing it. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, wondering what I'd done to deserve this. I knew I wasn't easy to deal with, but I was still their child. Shouldn't they have tried? At the end of that week, they told me to pack my things. My mum and Sean did it for me while I sat in the car, confused and numb. We drove for what felt like forever, but soon I realised we were heading to my grandma's house, my dad's mum. She was strict but kind, and I thought maybe they were dropping me off to stay with her for a few weeks as punishment. But when we got there, it became clear that this wasn't temporary. They unloaded my things at the front door and told me this was my new home. They didn't even try to sugarcoat it. They said they were done with me and didn't want any contact. I was too stunned to process it all. I begged them not to leave me there. Despite everything, I still wanted their approval and their love. But they were cold. My dad told my grandma they didn't want a freak in their home and wanted to focus on Sean, who was normal. That word stung. I'd heard it from bullies at school, but hearing it from my own father was worse. In that moment, I realised my parents were the biggest bullies of all. I stopped pleading. I watched as they drove away, and I felt the weight of abandonment sink in. But then my grandmother put her hand on my shoulder and led me inside. We sat down and she talked to me honestly. She admitted that she wasn't sure she could handle me at her age. She was in her 60s and already had her own struggles. But after hearing how I'd been treated, she decided she couldn't stand by any longer. She apologised for not stepping in sooner and promised that we would start fresh. I apologized to her too for everything I'd put her through in the past. We agreed to move forward and build something better together. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. I promised myself that I would be better, not for my parents, but for me and for my grandma, who believed in me when no one else did. Living with my grandma, whom I called Nana, was a big adjustment at first. After years of feeling unwanted and overlooked, it felt strange to have someone genuinely care about me. Nana was tough and didn't coddle me, but she was fair. She set rules and boundaries that were new to me, but they came from a place of care, not frustration or exhaustion. For the first time, I felt like there was someone who actually wanted to help me instead of just tolerating me. Nana knew about my past behavior. My parents had told her all about my trouble at school, my acting out, and my poor grades. She didn't sugarcoat things. She admitted that she was worried about taking me in at her age, but she also said that she understood why I acted the way I did. The way my parents treated me wasn't a secret, even if we never talked about it openly. She told me that this was a chance for both of us to start fresh. She promised to support me, but only if I put in the effort to change. That first conversation with her was a turning point. I promised her, and myself, that I would try to do better. It wasn't easy. I had years of anger and frustration pent up inside me, and changing overnight wasn't realistic. But Nana was patient. She worked with me, not against me, and that made all the difference. One of the first things she did was find me a tutor who specialized in working with kids like me, who struggled with learning disorders and needed extra help. It was a new experience to have someone who understood what I needed and didn't make me feel stupid or difficult. Slowly, I started to improve. The tutor was patient, and Nana made sure I stuck to a routine. There was no yelling or disappointment when I struggled. There was only support and encouragement to keep trying. Nana even enrolled me in a private school where the teachers were informed of my needs from the beginning. Unlike before, where my conditions were just excuses my parents used to explain my failures, Nana used them as reasons to get me the help I deserved. It was a different world. My teachers treated me like I was worth their time, and it started to make me believe it myself. Over the next few years, I rebuilt myself piece by piece. I wasn't perfect, and I had setbacks. There were days when I'd get frustrated and revert to my old habits, skipping assignments or shutting down when things got hard. But every time, Nana was there to pull me back up. She'd sit with me, talk things through, and remind me that I was more than what my parents had made me feel like. It wasn't just about getting good grades or staying out of trouble. It was about learning to trust myself and believe that I could be more than the burden I'd been told I was. My parents didn't completely disappear at first. They visited Nana occasionally, but those visits were awkward and tense. They made no effort to see me, and I made sure to stay outside the house when they came by. It was easier that way, even though it hurt to know they didn't care enough to see how I was doing. Nana, on the other hand, had enough of their attitude after a few visits. One day, after another argument where my dad called me a lost cause, Nana told them they were no longer welcome if they couldn't accept me or acknowledge what they'd done. She said they were the ones who failed as parents, not me. They didn't take that well. My dad stormed out and my mum followed, looking embarrassed but not willing to stand up to him. After that, they stopped visiting. It hurt, but I told myself that it was better this way. It was one less reminder of how little they cared. With them gone, it felt like a weight had lifted. I didn't have to brace myself for the sound of their car pulling into the driveway or the tension that came with every visit. Nana and I settled into our routine, and for the first time, I started to feel safe. I knew she didn't have a lot. She was a widow and lived off the savings and investments she and my grandfather had made. But she made sure I never felt like a burden. As the years passed, I started to thrive. I studied hard, graduated from high school with solid grades, and even got into college. It was something I never thought would be possible when I was that angry, lost kid my parents abandoned. Nana was there for every milestone, cheering me on and telling me how proud she was. She'd tell me stories about my grandfather, about how he would have been proud too, and it made me feel connected to something bigger than my past. My parents never reached out, not even when I graduated. They knew where to find me if they wanted to, but they chose not to. I told myself that it didn't matter and that I didn't need their approval, and most days I believed that. But there was always that part of me that wondered if they regretted what they'd done, if they ever thought about me at all. Nana was my family now, and that was enough. I'd found a way to move forward without them, and I was determined not to let their absence define me anymore. College was a fresh start, one I'd worked hard for and earned with Nana's unwavering support. Moving out was bittersweet. On one hand, I was excited to start this new chapter and show myself and Nana that all the work had been worth it. But on the other hand, leaving the only real home I'd known in years was hard. Nana hugged me tightly on the day I left, her voice steady but eyes misty. "You've got this, Nate. Your grandpa and I are proud. Those words carried me through some of the toughest moments in college. The first few weeks were overwhelming, but I pushed through, remembering why I was there and who had helped me get to that point. I made friends, joined study groups, and even found time to volunteer. It was a world I never imagined I'd be part of back when I was a frustrated kid, lashing out just to be seen. Nana and I talked often. Even though I wasn't living with her anymore, she was still my anchor. She'd call to remind me to take breaks from studying or send me funny stories about her day. It felt good to know she was still part of my life, even as I was building something new. The years flew by, and before I knew it, I was walking across the stage to get my degree. I wish Nana could have been there in person, but by then her health had started to decline and she couldn't travel. Still, I felt her presence in every cheer and clap from the crowd. After the ceremony, I called her immediately. "I did it, Nana," I said, my voice shaky. "I never doubted you for a second," she said, and I could hear the pride in her voice. After graduation, I got a job that paid well and allowed me to move into a place of my own. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine, and it felt like proof that I'd made it, that I'd beaten the odds stacked against me. Life was finally stable. Nana's health continued to decline, though, and I found myself visiting her more often. It was tough watching her get weaker, but she never lost her spark. She'd tell me stories about her childhood or remind me that life wasn't just about work, but about finding joy where you could. When Nana passed away, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Even though I knew it was coming, I wasn't ready to lose her. She'd been more than just a grandmother. She'd been my protector, my mentor, and the only parent figure who truly cared for me. The funeral was small, with friends and some distant relatives, but there was no sign of my parents. I didn't expect them to show up, but it still stung. After her passing, I found out through her will that she'd left everything to me. Her house, her savings, everything she and my grandfather had built together. It was overwhelming to realize how much she'd trusted and believed in me, even at the end. Life after Nana was hard. The house felt empty without her, and the silence reminded me of everything I'd lost. But I pushed forward, finding comfort in my work and the memories of her. I was still getting used to this new normal when, one day I heard a knock at my door. Opening it, I was met with a sight I hadn't expected. My parents. They looked older, more worn down than I remembered. But what shocked me the most was that Sean wasn't with them. "Hi, comma Nate," my mum said, her voice unsure. There was no warmth, no motherly smile, just discomfort. I crossed my arms, trying to mask the mix of anger and confusion boiling inside me. "What do you want?" My dad glanced at my mum before speaking. "We need to talk. Can we come in?" I hesitated, every instinct telling me to say no, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped aside and let them in. They sat down on my worn-out couch, looking out of place. After a moment of silence, my dad cleared his throat. "Your brother, Sean," the way they said it, as if it were the most natural thing to come to me after all these years, made me clench my fists. "And he's been struggling with some issues," my mum said softly. "Drugs, mostly. He's lost his job and we can't afford the rehab he needs." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were here for money. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. After more than a decade of silence, they were only at my door because they wanted something. "So you want me to help?" I asked, my voice cold. "Yes," my dad said. "You got everything from your grandmother, and Sean needs it more than ever. We're asking you to share it to help your brother." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean the grandmother you abandoned me with? The one you never checked on, never apologized to? And now you want her money? It's not like that, my mum said, eyes darting nervously. Sean needs this, Nate. He's your brother. I shook my head. Where were you when I needed you? When I was 14 and you dumped me on her doorstep and walked away? You made your choices and now I'm making mine, Dot. Their faces fell, but I didn't feel any sympathy. I felt justified. I told them there was one condition. If they wanted help, they'd have to publicly admit what they did, how they treated me and how they ignored Nana. Only then would I consider helping Sean. They called me selfish and cruel, but I stood firm. I wasn't the kid who begged for their approval anymore. They left, defeated, and I didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt. After my parents left that day, I sat in the silence of my living room, the echoes of their accusations still ringing in my ears. They had called me selfish, heartless, and unforgiving. But as I replayed their words in my mind, I didn't feel guilt. If anything, I felt relief. For once, I had stood up for myself and for Nana, who deserved better than to have her memory tarnished by the very people who abandoned us. The days passed, and my parents tried different ways to sway me. They left voicemails and sent long, guilt-laden texts, painting vivid pictures of Sean's struggles and begging me to reconsider. They even tried contacting me through relatives, using them as messengers to carry their pleas. But I held firm. I was willing to help, just not without their public acknowledgement of everything they'd done. One afternoon, I got a message from my aunt, my dad's sister. She'd always been a bit of a go-between in the family, staying in touch with everyone without taking sides. Nate, I know it's complicated, but is there no way to help without all the drama? Sean really is in bad shape, she wrote. I took a deep breath before replying. Aunt Lydia, it's not about Sean. I don't blame him for any of this, and I'd help if they'd just admit what they did. It's their pride standing in the way, not me, Dot. Her response was quiet, almost resigned. I understand, Nate. I just wish they did too. The messages and calls continued for a couple of weeks. Then, one day, my phone buzzed with a different kind of notification, a picture message from my mum. I opened it hesitantly and found a photo of Sean. He looked thin, pale, and defeated, sitting on the edge of a bed that was barely made. The caption read, "Please, Nate, he needs you." My chest tightened, not just from seeing my brother in that state, but from the blatant emotional manipulation. I remembered the kid I'd grown up with, the brother who was everything my parents wanted. It wasn't his fault that they were who they were, but helping them without holding them accountable felt like letting them win. They had to confront the damage they caused, not just to me, but to themselves. The next time they showed up, I was ready. I opened the door and found them standing there, but this time they weren't alone. Sean was with them, leaning heavily on my dad's arm. His eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something, shame maybe, or hope. It was hard to tell. Nate, please, my mum said, her voice breaking. Can we come in? I crossed my arms, fighting the conflict inside me. Only if you're here to agree to my condition. If not, there's nothing to talk about. Sean lifted his head and spoke for the first time. His voice was hoarse, weaker than I'd ever heard it. Nate, I know I wasn't there for you when you needed me. I didn't know how to be. But I'm asking now, not for them, but for me. His words chipped at my resolve, but I stayed firm. Sean, this isn't about you. I don't hate you. But if they can't admit what they did, then they're just using you as an excuse. And that's not fair to either of us, My dad's face twisted with frustration. Why does it matter so much to you, Nate? We're here now, asking for your help. Isn't that enough? I stared at him, the man who'd once called me a freak, without hesitation. No, Dad, it's not. Because if you can't admit what you did, then you haven't really changed. You're just here because you have no other option, My mum started to cry, a sound that once would have broken me. But now it felt hollow. They had never shed a tear for me when I was desperate, alone and afraid. I looked at Sean, whose eyes pleaded with me silently. I'll help you, I said to him, but only if they meet my condition. It's up to them, There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought they might actually consider it. But then my dad's jaw tightened and he turned to leave, dragging my mum and Sean with him. "We don't need this," he muttered. They left and I closed the door behind them, leaning against it as the reality of the moment washed over me. I felt a mix of relief and sadness. They had chosen their pride over Sean, over me, over everything. The messages stopped after that, and I didn't hear from them for a while. Weeks turned into months, and life carried on. I worked, spent time with friends, and found ways to honour Nana's memory by volunteering and staying involved in the community. But the silence from my parents was heavy, even if I didn't want to admit it. Then, one evening, I got a call from Aunt Lydia. "Nate, I thought you should know. Your parents finally talked." I sat up straighter. "Talked? What do you mean?" "They told a few close family members about what happened with you, why they left you with Nana and how they treated both of you. It's not the public apology you asked for, but it's a start. They're reaching out to some people, trying to make amends. I felt something shift inside me, an emotion I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was hope, or maybe just closure. Thank you for telling me, Aunt Lydia. I thought you'd want to know. And Sean, he's in rehab. A family friend stepped in to help cover it. He's doing better. Hearing that, I felt the tightness in my chest loosen just a little. Maybe things weren't fully resolved, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. Hearing that my parents had started talking about what happened was unexpected. It wasn't the full public acknowledgement I had demanded, but it was something. It was the first time they'd shown even a glimmer of facing what they'd done, and it left me feeling conflicted. I wanted to feel victorious, to know that I'd finally gotten through to them. But mostly, I felt a quiet, cautious hope. Over the next few weeks, Aunt Lydia kept me updated. My parents had begun speaking to other family members, admitting how they'd failed me and how they treated Nana. It wasn't a grand confession shouted from the rooftops, but it was honest, and it was reaching people who mattered. It felt like a small piece of justice for both Nana and me. Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, but answered anyway. "Hello? Nate, it's Sean Dot." His voice was stronger than the last time I'd heard it, but still tentative, like he was unsure if he was welcome. "Hey, Sean," I said, my tone neutral but open. I wanted to tell you that I'm doing better," he said. "I'm in a residential program now, and it's helping. I know you had a lot to do with pushing them to make changes, even if they didn't do it exactly the way you asked." I felt a rush of mixed emotions, relief, pride, and an old, lingering sadness. "I'm glad you're getting the help you need, Sean. You deserve it. Dot." There was a pause, then he spoke again, quieter this time. "They're trying, you know. Mum and Dad. It's hard for them, but they're talking to people and admitting things. I don't know if they'll ever come to you directly, but they're changing. I thought you should know." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thanks for telling me. That means more than you think, Dot." The conversation ended on a note that felt unfamiliar but good. It was the first real connection I'd had with Sean in years. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking less about what my parents owed me and more about what I owed myself, and what Nana would want for me. Nana had always said that holding on to anger was like carrying a heavy backpack up a mountain. "You can do it," she'd said once, "but it'll make the climb harder than it needs to be." Maybe it was time to put some of that weight down. One evening, I sat down and wrote a letter. It wasn't for anyone but me. A way to put everything out into the world without needing a response. I wrote about the pain of being abandoned, the bitterness of being called a freak by the people who were supposed to love me, and the way Nana had saved me when no one else would. But I also wrote about forgiveness, not because they deserved it, but because I did. I needed to move forward, and that couldn't happen if I kept replaying the past. After writing it, I felt lighter, like I'd finally let go of something that had been clawing at me for years. The next time Aunt Lydia called, she mentioned that my parents wanted to reach out. They weren't asking for money or favours, they just wanted to talk. I told her I'd think about it, and for the first time, I meant it. A few months passed before I decided to meet them. It was at a small diner halfway between their home and mine. When I walked in, they were already seated, looking older and more worn than I remembered. My mum's eyes filled with tears when she saw me, and my dad looked down, unable to meet my gaze. Nate, my mum said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for coming. I nodded, sitting down across from them. The silence stretched, and for a moment, I wondered if this had been a mistake. But then my dad cleared his throat and spoke, his voice unsteady. We failed you, Nate. We failed you and Nana. There's no excuse for it, and we can't take it back. But we're sorry, Dot. Hearing those words, something shifted in me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step. We talked for a while, stilted and cautious, but real. They admitted their mistakes, not just to me, but to themselves. It was raw, painful, and long overdue. By the end of the conversation, we weren't a family again. That kind of trust takes time, and I didn't know if we'd ever fully get there. But we were trying, and for now, that was enough. Sean reached out more often after that, telling me about his progress and the plans he was making for the future. He'd found a job and was focusing on staying clean. I was proud of him, not just for getting better, but for facing the truth about our family and fighting his own battles. Life continued, and so did I. I still had Nana's house, filled with memories and the lessons she taught me. I started hosting small gatherings for friends, filling the rooms with laughter and life again. It felt right, like a way to honor her spirit. My parents and I stayed in touch, slowly and carefully rebuilding something from the rubble. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was better than silence. And through it all, I held on to the knowledge that Nana would be proud of the man I'd become, not because of my past, but because of how I'd chosen to move forward. In the end, I learned that forgiveness isn't about letting people off the hook. It's about letting yourself move on. And that was exactly what I did. The slow mending of my relationship with my parents wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were setbacks, moments where I questioned if it was worth the effort, and days where the memories of abandonment still stung. But over time, those moments became fewer, the sharp edges of the past smoothed by time and the tentative rebuilding of trust. Sean and I spoke regularly. His life was moving forward, one steady step at a time. He'd gotten a job at a local business and was taking night classes to earn a certification. Hearing the hope in his voice during our calls made it easier to forgive him for the distance between us when we were younger. We were both victims of a broken family, learning to heal in our own ways. My parents were a different story. Our relationship was like a fragile truce, built on the promise of honesty and the understanding that we couldn't change what had happened. I learned to let go of expecting grand gestures or heartfelt confessions from them. Instead, I focused on the small, genuine moments. My mum sending me a handwritten note saying she was proud of me, my dad awkwardly asking about my work during our conversations. These were the little victories that meant more than any apology. One day, as I was cleaning out Nana's old desk, I found a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. They were from my grandfather to Nana during their early years of marriage. Each letter was filled with stories of their dreams, challenges, and unwavering support for each other. Reading them, I felt a renewed sense of gratitude for the woman who had raised me and for the legacy she and my grandfather left behind. Their love and resilience were what fueled me to be better, to hold on to the lessons they had taught me about forgiveness and strength. It was during one of Sean's visits that we decided to do something for Nana's memory. We should organise a community day at the house, he suggested over coffee. Invite the neighbourhood, friends, family, turn it into a way to honour her. I smiled at the idea. It was perfect. Nana had always been the type to welcome people with open arms, whether they needed a hot meal, a story to lift their spirits, or a warm place to rest. Yeah, I said. She'd love that. Over the next few weeks, we planned everything out. Friends pitched in to help set up tables and decorate the garden where Nana and I had spent countless afternoons. On the day of the event, people from the neighbourhood, family members and friends who knew Nana or had heard stories about her gathered in her garden. Laughter filled the air, and for the first time in a long while, the house felt alive again. My parents showed up, nervous but determined. My mum brought a tray of homemade cookies, Nana's recipe. My dad stood by, quieter than usual but present, which was more than I could have asked for a year ago. They mingled cautiously, staying close to the edges of the crowd, but they were there, and that mattered. Sean took a turn speaking, sharing memories of Nana that made everyone laugh and tear up at the same time. When it was my turn, I stood under the old oak tree where she'd often read to me and took a deep breath. Nana taught me that family isn't just who you're born with, but who stands by you when things fall apart. She was that for me, and I hope today we honour her the way she deserves. The crowd clapped, and I felt a peace settle over me like the warmth of a summer sun. I caught my parents' eyes and saw something I hadn't expected. Pride. It was tentative, almost apologetic. But it was there. It was enough. As the sun set and the last guests left, Sean and I sat on the back steps, watching the sky change colours. She'd be happy, he said, breaking the silence. Yeah, I agreed, feeling the truth of it deep in my chest. Life continued to move forward after that day. My parents and I still had our ups and downs, but there were more good days than bad. Sean stayed on track, becoming more confident in his new life. I kept working, volunteering, and finding new ways to keep Nana's spirit alive. One evening after a long day at work, I looked around the house and realised it no longer felt empty. It was full of life, memories, and possibilities. Nana's presence lingered in every corner, not as a ghost of the past, but as a guide for the future. I smiled, thinking that maybe she was right. Holding on to anger was like carrying a heavy backpack, and I'd finally set mine down. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending the pain hadn't happened, but it did mean allowing myself to live beyond it, to let go of the shadows of my past and step into the light of what I'd built. And in that moment, I knew that Nana's legacy wasn't just in what she'd given me, but in what I would continue to carry forward. It was more than enough. Story 2. I am a 39-year-old man who has been married to my 36-year-old wife for 15 years. Our kid is 13 years old. My family is rather large. There are my 58-year-old mother, my 62-year-old father, my 30-year-old sister, and my 22-year-old youngest brother. Something unexpected occurred last year. In our bedroom, I discovered my wife sobbing. I questioned her about what was wrong. She informed me of her pregnancy. I told her it was fantastic news and was ecstatic. However, she appeared rather distressed and simply left the room, which I found somewhat odd. At about the same time, I saw that she was using her phone a lot more than normal because of the ongoing COVID crisis. Since no one else could come over to help, I was the only one caring for Mum and doing all the chores. She eventually gave birth to our daughter, who is really cute and resembles her mother exactly. Let's fast forward to the recent past. My younger brother began to visit frequently, almost every day. Since he is, after all, my younger brother, I first didn't give it much thought. However, I began to notice something strange when we all travelled to spend a few weeks with my parents. My wife was behaving more like my brother than was reasonable. I have a lot on my plate personally. I am the primary provider for my parents and our family. I work as an investment banker and manage a few stores for my parents. In addition, we rent out a number of our homes. Yes, I have a lot going on, but while I was at home, I couldn't help but observe how much time my brother and wife were spending together. She used to be closer to my sister than anybody else, so I found this strange. In addition to the strange emotions I was receiving from my brother and wife, I also noticed that my sister was spending more time with me than normal. She seemed to be attempting to convey something significant to me, but each time I questioned her about it, she would dismiss it and claim that everything was okay. She said there was nothing to be concerned about. Then, without warning, my dad wants to take me fishing alone, individually. Sure, why not? I ask. He begins telling us about his own fishing adventures and recollections of spending time with his own father at the same location while we are out fishing and relaxing. I mean, that was pleasant. In addition, Dad begins to show me how pleased he is of me and what a wonderful kid I am. However, it was evident to me that he had more to say. He eventually reaches the point where he expresses his sadness for my little brother. As it happens, my brother doesn't actually have many objectives. He smokes so much, drinks too much, and isn't working. My mum always had a soft place for my brother, but my dad and he were never really close. As we're finishing up, suddenly my dad tells that he must go somewhere. He gives me this small piece of paper with instructions to read it when he leaves, along with the fishing equipment. When I open this document, my entire world suddenly changes. The results of the DNA test hit me like a ton of bricks. My daughter's biological father is not me. That was not enough for me to sit with. Everyone was already gathering at our family home when I hurried back. It was like entering a hurricane. When I confronted my brother and wife, they both acknowledged everything, expressed regret, and acknowledged that it was all a huge error. It became out that they had feelings for one another and that this had been going on for over a year. In an attempt to comfort me, my wife said she was sorry for what had happened and would always be sorry. She insisted that I was the ideal father and husband, but wow, it was a lot to hear. It simply didn't improve anything. Here's the dirt then. I'm this person who's constantly looking for a job, right? I'm always buzzing from work. I'm barely at home because of it. Don't get it wrong though, not all of me was Mia. Twice a year, I made sure we took those amazing vacations, and once or twice a month, those adorable date nights. Additionally, we consistently maintained a bustling romance department. I was that guy all the time, dropping in and saying, "Hey, how are you?" I was hoping that if something was bothering her, she would open up. My sister suddenly enters the picture and says, "I knew something was off, but I just couldn't say it." Can you imagine the sensation of that? Similar to a gut punch. But hold on, it gets more bizarre. In an attempt to teach me acceptance, my mother chooses to join the whole scene, baby in tow. She is everything. My child has been bonded to this new baby, so let's just go on and celebrate. Which surprise is the love kid of my brother and wife? By claiming that I'm the big bro, she is pleading for pardon. I also got to lead by example. My mouth fell to the ground. That's how my own family plays me. I simply let it out. Told my wife directly, I will not engage in these games, vying for your focus. Divorce? Yes, that is now on the table. And my brother, whom I've always supported. As it happens, it was him who stabbed me. I left them to deal with the disaster they created and went away. Since I bounced, my phone has been exploding constantly. My dad calls me, attempting to be discreetly helpful because he is in the middle of my relationship with my mother. Carrying this guilt, he claims to have been a bad father and reveals that my mother was aware of the affair all along but chose to remain silent. Forget it, I said. Perhaps I should just cut myself off from this so-called family if this is how things are going to be, once the divorce has been finalized. I haven't even had a chance to mention this spectacle to her family. In the meantime, my ex-boyfriend is always on my phone, making constant calls and sending a ton of texts. My son is really missing me in the midst of all of this. My entire universe seems to have been completely upended, and all I'm doing is attempting to determine which way is up. Here's the thing then. My brother, since everything went wrong, yes, he hasn't even made an effort to get in touch. He didn't say a word, but my sister did come forward and apologize. I know I should have been there for you, but I simply couldn't find the guts, she said. I've always thought of you as the superhero, and I'm really honored to have you as my brother. I was struck by it, you know. However, I must admit that I haven't had the energy to respond to her, or anybody else for that matter. Get this now. My mother suddenly makes the decision to call me. She starts talking about how everyone makes mistakes occasionally, and then goes on to say that if I just choose to forgive and move on, our family may miraculously become happy again. She then drops the shocking, claiming that my children require a father figure. And guess who's waiting in the wings if I can't be that guy? My sibling. Yes, as if that would improve the situation in any way. She also made an attempt to scare me by threatening to take away my chances of keeping my children if she supported me in court. That simply infuriated me. I pressed the block button on her more quickly than you can imagine. Betrayal. Since then, I have not spoken to any of them. Going into this entire divorce mess now is going to be very expensive, but now I'm saying, bring it on. It's been difficult to sleep, and I've kept all of this a secret from almost everyone else. Don't think about it. Eating. What is that? I feel like I've lost everything that made life worthwhile, and I'm simply going through the motions. My spouse, my children, and my family. Even my pride. Everything has simply disappeared into thin air. It has been a nightmare of a week. I'm unable to wake up, leaving me unsure of what I should do next. What's the purpose, really, without all that? Do you know? Edit. I thus spoke with a lawyer regarding the divorce process. The problem is that I need to begin the filing procedure immediately. According to the lawyer, I will need to pay spousal support, which is essentially money to support our kid and my soon-to-be ex-wife. Yes, I still adore her despite the fact that she is not biologically mine. The worst part is that, given the circumstances, it will be difficult to obtain primary custody for her, even if she is officially my daughter. Not by DNA, though. Indeed, the entire divorce process will not be easy or inexpensive. However, it appears that I will have to pay around $900 each month for them. Furthermore, it appears that I may wind up with shared custody of my kid after things are divided. That's around 50% time spent with him. In addition, I'll have to split half of our assets. Oh, and the DNA test I told you about. I apologize. I intended it to be a paternity test between my brother and daughter. According to the data, there is a 99% possibility that my brother is the father. Can you believe it, really? When my wife and I initially started dating, he was just 7 years old. Describe a chaotic scene. Here is a little report on my circumstances. As time passed, I was kind of clinging to the notion that perhaps just possibly things might begin to appear less bleak. But was I mistaken? It seems as though the world decided to intensify the drama for those who haven't been following my soap opera after observing my predicament. To get the whole story, you might want to go back and read my previous post. To cut a long tale short, I left our home after learning of the entire issue, organised my finances, spoke with some legal experts, and started the process of getting a divorce from this whole ordeal. On Friday of this past week, the divorce papers suddenly appeared in my possession. Then my wife unexpectedly arrives at my house. She tries to apologise for the entire disaster she created and pulls the "let's think about our son" card during our lengthy conversation. Here's the problem, though. I've made up my mind. I'm finished. I obtain this and give her the divorce papers. As though it would make me forget everything and end the divorce, she attempts to change the subject and woo me. I told her to get out of there because I couldn't stand it. But hold on. There's more. Normally away having a great time in the Netherlands, my sister chose to return for what was meant to be a relaxing holiday. Well, this whole circus quickly threw that strategy out the window. She didn't mince words. We ended up having a heart-to-heart over the phone after she departed, where I laid into my parents and wife before she completed her vacation and went home. Being caught up in this whole mess caused her to feel somewhat conflicted. It seems that my mother had been pleading with her to keep the information from me. I was so worried about how I would react to the news. It turns out that my mum kept things quiet in part because of my younger brother. Though it didn't exactly make me feel better about the mess I'm in, the conversation with my sister did provide some clarity. Indeed, I have seen remarks circulating that suggest my life is too crazy to be real. To be honest, I hope that was all a horrible dream. Nope, it's all occurring. And I feel as like I'm witnessing the disintegration of my reality. It feels like everything I've ever cared about is slipping away from me. If there is a good side, it is this one. Recently, I was able to spend some time with my kid. We visited this gambling area. For a few hours. That is the only thing that is popular here. It resembled a brief reprieve from the mayhem. He and I are going on some virtual excursions alone. I therefore had a genuine conversation with my brother. Correct? He breaks the news to me that our mum has been going through a really difficult time, crying almost every day. Then there's my wife and the entire thing. I suppose the ex-wife is just adrift in this sea of uncertainty, completely unclear of what to do next. She seems to be unable to find her way out of the difficult situation she finds herself in. But hold on. There's more. It turns out that my younger brother's lack of responsibility is largely to blame for the predicament we're in. The man would rather get wasted and drown in alcohol than deal with any actual obligations. So far, my sister and I have had enough. We both resolved to put the whole family turmoil behind us since we've had enough. We're even avoiding any controversy surrounding inheritance because really, Who wants that sort of hassle? This is when things take a step further. I'm really considering severing all ties with the family. I'm considering simply moving to another nation and starting again. Through all of this, my sister, bless her, has been a pillar of support, even offering to help me set up if I decide to go to the Netherlands. And the more I consider it, the more I believe that's my direction. After a little while, I began the entire divorce procedure a year ago. It hasn't been easy, let me tell you. The days seem to go on forever, and I get really depressed every time I let my thoughts to return to the mess. I can't remember how many times I've been ill because I've been under so much stress, as well as my health. Yes, my blood pressure and blood sugar levels are all over the place and it's not going well. Then, without warning, my father calls me. There is some very unpleasant news for him. My mother suffered a severe stroke. She passed out in the middle of her meal, and now she lies in a hospital bed with a quite dire prognosis. In the middle of all commotion, the doctors advise us to keep her in our prayers, but they are not very optimistic. My ex-wife has been taking charge of the hospital's operations. My younger brother occasionally displays his face for a few hours before vanishing. Together, my dad, kids and I are attempting to weather this storm. Dad is urging me to come visit, essentially anticipating the worst. My sister and I had a heart-to-heart about the whole thing, and she is equally conflicted as I am. A part of me is considering seeing my mother. However, a significant portion of me is just, I'm not sure, apprehensive. Man, it's a disaster. It's like attempting to solve a jigsaw with half the parts missing while you're trying to decide what to do next. This is the offer. The lady who is my mother is still my mother at the end of the day. However, it's a major deal, yet she made the decision to abandon me. She seemed to have considered every option for helping me. I just moved the opposite direction to stand with my wife after shrugging. The fact that my wife ended up with my brother isn't what really irritates me. Yes, it hurts like hell, but what hurts the most is the betrayal of my own physical and emotional integrity. Not a single person bothered to let me know what was going on, even though the entire team knew. By supporting my brother and thus implying that I would be left alone if I made a big deal out of it, my mother truly stole the cake. A plot twist now. Suddenly, my mum wants to visit me while she's in the hospital. I quote, "I'm a complete mess about it, to be quite honest. My mind is in such a bad place that I'm considering ending my life. I've tried opening up to therapists in the hopes of receiving some insightful advice, but it seems like they're only there to nod and accept my money without providing any genuine assistance. My family have been circling the hospital visits to spice up this drama. Additionally, common news of my wife's brief adventure spreads. Seeing dominoes fall is analogous to this. I always thought my favourite uncle was level-headed, but now he loses it all. Not only that, but he attacks her and my brother verbally while they are in the hospital. My adolescent had to take over and play the peacekeeper since it was that horrible. And it worked. Unbelievably. Thus I find myself enmeshed in this whole chaos. I've been discussing my ideas with my friends in an attempt to get perspective. All of them are essentially singing the same song. Complete the divorce, move, and even start again in another nation. Make a fresh start. Try to put together what appears to be happiness with a new person. I quote EM simply trying to live day by day, but there's a lot to consider. This is where I am now. Making any type of planning is like attempting to capture smoke with my bare hands, and I feel like I'm floating in this strange vacuum. It simply isn't taking place. You know, I had this meeting with my lawyer to attempt to figure out what I may do next. He explains to me that, in theory, I might still receive my share of the estate, even if my mother never got around to drafting a will. That is, assuming I don't give up on it, or if she doesn't decide to remove me from the situation completely. Nothing like that has occurred as of yet. Here quote is the worst part though. At this moment, my family is still holding on to the money from the inheritance. I just no longer find any significance in it. Making sure my son is okay is all that is on my mind and all that I truly care about. I want so badly to simply grab him and get away from this family disaster. Look for a place where we can relax and feel secure. I'm now attempting to ensure my son has a bright future by becoming involved in the paternity dispute. It looks like it will be much more of a hardship than the divorce. And that's saying something, I tell you. It seems that in many jurisdictions, the entire affair scenario doesn't truly tilt the scales. And I'm in a bit of a bind because my wife has been the one at home with our child. However, I've discovered a small strategy. It may really work in my advantage if I give up any inheritance claims. I might even avoid the whole spousal support issue. However, that's a big if and depends on us being able to work together. In addition, I have the choice to complain about my brother for destroying my marriage. In addition, my children are still underage. It could be effective to impose a restraining order on my brother and wife, particularly considering I'm from a place where the entire drug and booze thing doesn't sit well. Indeed, a ray of optimism is seen through this storm cloud. But gosh, I've been completely caught off guard by my mum's health, taking a serious turn for the worse. It's amazing how a few weeks can completely upend your existence and take you to the brink of despair. My son is the one thing that has kept me rooted during this entire catastrophe. He helps me navigate even the darkest nights like a beacon of light. The one thing that makes me realize that I must continue to push through this mess. Throwing yourself into the deep end then. My mother's illness was far worse than everyone had anticipated. Even with all the animosity, I couldn't ignore her. You know, it was one of those times when you could just turn up and forget about the past. So I did. I saw her like that, all frail and wired up to machines when I went to the hospital. I was affected by it. It served as a gut punch reminder that despite everything, there is still a familial bond that is difficult to cut off. I felt compelled to handle this difficult problem. I talked with Taylor. I made an effort to explain the entire dress code. Our topic is black tuxedos. Very James Bond. And perhaps just possibly I became a little too intense. I'm not proud of what I said in the end. For example, asking him to be more manly and implying that his typical mannerisms would make people laugh. Being the champion that he is, Taylor first just shrugged it off and joked about wearing a white dress. However, following our conversation, he made the decision to decline the wedding. I can't help but feel like I made a mistake, even though he has been calm about it and assured me there are no hard feelings. Despite his tendency to follow his own path, Taylor has been my ride or die for years, and I cherish our relationship much. Our group chat is currently exploding with questions from my family over Taylor's decision to skip the wedding, and our group of friends has been tense ever since he declined the invitation. I'm now wondering if I was too severe, or if I was too preoccupied with organising the wedding to keep in mind what matters most. Did I make a huge mistake? Am I the villain in this situation? It gets considerably messier from here. My wife, or maybe more accurately my soon-to-be ex-wife, was playing the obedient daughter-in-law in the hospital. Watching her move across the room as if nothing had occurred was unreal, our interactions like traversing a minefield. In the middle of this, we were both carefully avoiding the enormous elephant in the room. With the exception of his fleeting appearances in the hospital, my brother, who has been MIA, ultimately chooses to have a heart-to-heart. To put it mildly, it was embarrassing. He's opening up, claiming he's adrift without his older brother's supervision and expressing regret for the mayhem he caused. There was a part of me that wanted to ignore him. However, another part of him, possibly the one that recalled all the happy days before everything went wrong, could not just close the door. My sister has been my pillar of support during all of this. She has been taking care of our parents, managing the logistics, and keeping me from going crazy. In order to help mend things, or at least get us to a point where we can be in the same room without it turning into World War III, she has even begun to discuss scheduling some family therapy sessions. The legal struggle has been a whole other animal. As if we were planning a military takeover, my lawyer has been on rapid dial. We're juggling everything. Divorce, custody, inheritance, you name it. The bright side. We may have discovered a weakness that may help me win the custody dispute. Considering my brother and wife's entire issue, even if it's unlikely, I'll take what I can get for now. The worst part is about to come. Things became more convoluted just when I believed they couldn't get any more complicated. Bless his heart, my kid has been handling all of this rather well. However, it's obvious that it's affecting him. His grades have plummeted, and he has been misbehaving and fighting at school. In addition to everything else, I'm attempting to be super dad, by guiding him through this difficult time without losing who he is. Then there's my wife and the entire thing, or to be more specific, she has been giving out conflicting messages, acting as though we are sworn enemies one moment, then begging for another opportunity the next. I wish I could get off this roller coaster, but I've been making an effort to be at least somewhat cordial for the benefit of our children. What is the strategy going forward then? To be honest, you have to take things one day at a time. Providing my youngster with a stable atmosphere and letting him know he's not alone are my top priorities. Even though the divorce is still on schedule, I'm prepared for the effect. Even though it will be a difficult journey, when it comes to family dynamics, it's like attempting to negotiate a minefield while wearing a blindfold. A great deal of betrayal and hurt are present. However, there is also a ray of optimism that we might be able to salvage something from this debris. Not only will it not be quick, but it will also not be simple. However, I'm beginning to believe that there could be a glimmer of hope at the end of this really bleak tunnel. I quote, "We've been making an effort to concentrate on the good things, the epiphanies, the minor triumphs, and the lessons this entire experience has taught me in the interim. In addition to serving as a reminder of what matters most in life, it has, rather surprisingly, strengthened my bonds with other family members. Let's simply say that it has helped me identify my true dependability. That quote is it. The most recent chapter in my life's continuous story. There have been several detours along the way, ups and downs, but I'm developing, learning, and most importantly, surviving through it all. Hopefully, the following chapter will be a bit less dramatic. Who am I kidding, though? If all goes well, I should have enough material for a best-selling book by the end of this. Story 3. I'm a man, 47. My lovely girlfriend and I are getting married. 34.5-year-old girls in less than a week. My second engagement is this one. I nearly married my ex-girlfriend 11 years ago. 38 woman. We had been dating for about a decade, and she was my high school sweetheart. We even shared a home for 5 years, of course. I was therefore prepared to be married, of course. I guess I wasn't the only one who was taken aback. She seemed to be too. When I told my family that we were engaged, they were thrilled since they had a good opinion of my ex. The shock was increased, though, when my ex ended up having a sexual experience with my 34-year-old brother only one day before the wedding. I complied with my ex's request that I stay at a motel the night before the wedding, since she felt that being apart was vital to ward off bad luck. Regretfully, or perhaps happily, I had to go back for my shoes since I had left them at home. A couple of hours after arriving at the hotel, my ex detested shutting off lights when leaving a room, so I was shocked to notice that the living room was dark when I got home. I couldn't believe she had remembered Dot. The shoebox was very significant to me, so I walked inside and went straight to the bedroom where I kept it. However, I saw the scariest sight I had ever seen as I opened my room's door. My ex and my younger brother were laying in bed together, so engrossed in their performance that they hardly acknowledged my presence. They noticed me in a matter of seconds, but I was stuck in place, not knowing how to respond. When I finally realized what I had just seen, my entire world fell apart, and I immediately fled. I drove back to the hotel in a panic and hyperventilation, even though my ex called after me, blatantly rejecting what I had witnessed. This was crazy because I was getting married the next day. After arriving at my room, I needed some time to gather myself, and when I did, I ended up crying for at least an hour. I was lucky that I hadn't let my ex know which hotel I was staying at, so she was just able to contact me, which is exactly what she did. She tried to persuade me that it was an isolated incident by sending me a barrage of apologies messages after it happened. I was still quite doubtful of her answer, though. She also said she wanted to release some pent-up energy since she was feeling overburdened by the impending wedding. She said that my brother had always supported her and that she didn't know who else to turn to at that time. After what I'd witnessed, I found it impossible to believe she was even attempting to clarify herself, so I blocked her right away. Since I didn't care for any of their nonsense excuses, I also banned my brother. After some time, I finally got myself together and called off all of the wedding plans. First and foremost because I was going to escape this disaster regardless of the amount of money I lost. Since my ex had just squandered 10 years of my life, I was willing to spend a few $1,000s to avoid having to spend any more time with her. My next course of action was to phone my parents and inform them of the situation. They couldn't decide if they should take my brother away or comfort me. I gave them a little time to think about it. It was late in the evening by that point, so I ordered dinner and then sobbed myself to sleep. After that day, I saw my ex just twice more. She came home the first time to get her things and head off. The second occasion was at a party hosted by mutual friends a few years later. She tried to talk to me, but I walked away as soon as I saw her approaching. My parents broke off my brother because of what he did to me, and we haven't spoken since. He has been working in Europe for the past 3 years as far as I know. In any case, I've been able to get over that terrible incident, and that is all behind me. She was a better lady whom I completely trust, and I'm in a better place now. Up until a few days ago, precisely 1 week before to my wedding, everything was going smoothly. I was contacted by my ex. She contacted me using a different Facebook account because I had blocked her original account first, and I'm not sure how she found out about me or my wedding. She wrote me many messages expressing how heartbroken she was to learn that I was getting married again. Given that we were never legally married despite our close marriage, I found it strange that she used the phrase once again. However, the setting seemed completely familiar. I was really affected by the way she begged me to accept her back in spite of her behavior and said that I was the only guy she had ever loved. I even informed my fiancé about it right away. This upset a part of me so much that I wanted to scold her for disturbing me prior to my wedding. But I had a darker side that was desperate for vengeance. I was aware that I had handled the matter like an adult and had done the proper thing all those years ago. But this time, I was really motivated to hurt her emotionally to the point where she would never even think about contacting me again. Despite having been cheated on herself in the past, my fiancé was very supportive of the notion when I told her about my sentiments. Even if it was acknowledged that our relationship wasn't 10 years long, it nevertheless had a negative effect. So she understood my feelings. Instead of simply letting things go this time, we devised a scheme to get retribution and ensure that my ex suffered the same amount of misery that she caused me. For this reason, a few hours after she texted me, I chose to reply, stating that I was at last prepared to speak with her. She said she was ready to visit me right away, but I advised her to get a room at a hotel in the area. In order to keep my fiancé from becoming suspicious, I agreed to see her there the next day. My fiancé was at my side the entire time, and she shockingly accepted the plan. I so visited her hotel the following day. She was shedding happy tears and was ecstatic to meet me at the hour we decided upon. But in a few minutes she would be shedding actual tears. She sat me down and began to tell me how sorry she was for what had transpired over the previous 12 years. She didn't know how to contact me until she learned from a friend that I was getting married again. But I wanted to make things right. She thought it was important to send one final SMS, worried that if she didn't, she would lose me forever. I pretended to be interested, listening intently and holding her hand as she talked. I waited impatiently for my fiancé to arrive at this time. After nearly 20 minutes, I hurried to open the door when I heard a knock, indicating her arrival. Following my fiancé's response, all of our bridesmaids and groomsmen donned masks depicting my brother's visage. My brother's smile was beaming up at us even after they brought in a cake. My former partner was so appalled that he was at a loss for words. She watched with a startled look on her face as we shouted surprise eyes, because I doubt anyone would have anticipated this, since she had previously told the hotel personnel to let in any guests who wished to see her, something she had specifically meant for me. We were able to persuade them that we would surprise her, and it was not too difficult. However, I had other ideas. Once she had had time to comprehend what was going on, she began to weep and mutter some unintelligible nonsense. A week before my wedding, she messaged me, and I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easy. The day before our wedding, he was bold enough to cheat on me with my own brother. She now had to face the repercussions of her behavior. I made it plain that this was what she deserved, and that any possibility of reconciliation would only be entertained following her treachery. Then she was completely mistaken. She had no right to text me after what she had done to me, and I was relieved that I had caused her pain because she had caused it herself. Despite my chilly and abrupt demeanour, she kept crying and told me that I should have blocked and ignored her if I didn't want her back, rather than making a special effort to make her feel so humiliated. However, I had absolutely no sympathy for her. Not now, not then. I left her sobbing alone in the hotel room after telling her not to talk to me ever again. I quote mean getting married in 2 days. However, some of my fiancé's friends feel that I should apologise to my ex because I reprimanded her in a severe manner that day. Some might contend that she didn't deserve this in spite of what she accomplished. But this is not the case with my groomsmen, who have known me since middle school. They are well aware of my struggles with depression and my fight for survival in the years after my separation with my ex because of the situation. They know how much she meant to me and how much I loved her. Therefore, they didn't criticise or care about what I had done. This was too honest and genuine for my fiancé's pals, who had likely been hoping for some high school drama to gossip about afterwards. Her friends are refusing to attend the wedding, but my fiancé is on my side and doesn't think I should apologise. I'm incredibly conflicted because on the one hand, I don't want my followers to be disappointed on our wedding day if I don't do it now. She truly cherishes her pals after all. However, I also don't believe I have any need to apologise to my ex. She just didn't want to see me happy, but she could have simply kept out of my life and this would never have occurred. She also attempted to play the victim by continuing to send texts from phony accounts about how I had broken her heart and that she would undoubtedly get even with me in the future. Not for my ex, and definitely not for my fiancé's bridesmaids. I'm not a big fan of this type of emotional manipulation. I feel somewhat obligated to apologise now, even though I know she will never ask me to do so for her own sake. And I'm here for that reason. I have to make a decision now since I'm running out of time. 80 for making my cheating ex seem bad. A week before my wedding, she made an attempt to reunite with me. To put it mildly, there has been a wide range of responses to this. The wedding is only a day away, and I made the decision to talk to my fiancé before taking any concrete action. I tell her how I've been feeling, as most others have advised. When I informed her, she immediately responded that I didn't have to apologise to my ex since her bridesmaids felt that same, and that they could miss her wedding if it upset them. Even after she revealed that my ex and I had been together for 10 years and that she had cheated on me with my brother, an act deemed unforgivably cruel and unforgivable, she revealed that her bridesmaids were ignorant of the specifics and that many of them thought I had overreacted. They were dubious, believing that I was being unfair and that I should apologise to her, even though the issue was serious. She so gave up on attempting to convince them of my point of view, and even informed them that they were under no obligation to attend our wedding if they so desired. Her pals are unlikely to be attending, and she hasn't spoken to them in a whole day. She had purchased all of them, and one of them even reimbursed her for the price of the bridesmaid outfit. She also believes that the majority of them will skip. I know she's in pain, but she's putting up a brave front for me. My fiancé claims she doesn't care because she has been friends with these women since high school. In her heart, though, I know she does. I have thus made the decision to speak with her friends and attempt to persuade them on my own. My former partner has turned into a real annoyance. She managed to phone me a few hours ago and tried to quarrel with me for a whole 15 minutes. She insisted that I was still in love with her, but I was too proud to acknowledge it. What made her believe that? She claims that I humiliated her after going to such extent. It's clear that I still harboured affections for her. Deep inside. Yes, she is correct. However, such emotions are revulsion and hatred. Whatever the cause, she thinks. All I wanted was a final glimpse of her. I had grasped her hands during her conversation because of this. To be honest, though, that was just shocking. More than that. She continued to babble about how we were soulmates and that I needed to call off the wedding before I made a big mistake. Even though I was physically laughing in her face while I was speaking to her in the hopes that she would get the message. Really, the only reason I'm thinking about any of this is to save her from making any unfortunate choices. To help with her removal, I've been trying to get in touch with her parents, but I haven't been successful yet. As such, I am awaiting their response with patience. I'll be able to break up with her permanently after they take over. I still detest her, don't get me wrong, but I also don't want her to harm herself. That quotes not how inhuman I am. Hello, everyone. Thus, we are now legally wed. A few days have passed since the ceremony, and I still find it hard to believe. She's my wife now. Although I'm overjoyed, there is still some depressing news. I tried to get her friends to attend the wedding, but they ultimately did not. I individually phoned each of them to explain why I didn't want to apologize and why I had done what I had done. However, they were not really fond of it. They weren't very thrilled when I requested them to come only for my wife, and it just sounded strange to me since, even if I didn't like the person a buddy was getting married to, I would still go to their wedding. It wasn't until yesterday that I found out the true reason. My wife eventually admitted that she had suspected her pals wouldn't be there. Whether I apologized or not, it was only because she had disagreed with them and refused to perform what they had requested of her. They constantly needed to present a unified front since they didn't like that at all and felt that they were one unit. She had known these high school pals for a long time, and although they had been able to maintain their friendship over the years since they had not had many major arguments, this was the first time their relationship had been put to the test. In this case, her decision to pick me over her friends didn't sit well with them. She acknowledged that she was a little disturbed by the circumstance, but she was too ashamed to say so, believing that the entire issue is childish. However, I didn't mind because I was now certain that her pals were only self-centered and that I wasn't actually to blame for this. My wife even said that she was relieved they had declined to go since it meant she could finally stop trying to fit in and live her life without having to continuously get her friends' approval. We thus benefited from that, I guess. Additionally, the night before my wedding, I received a response from my ex's parents. I quickly told them what their daughter had attempted to do, and that in order to protect her, they needed to go to the hotel where she had been sleeping and bring her back with them. She was acting quite irrationally and crazy. She shouldn't have been left alone, in my opinion. They were trekking without network connectivity. It turns out, nevertheless, when they returned, they thanked me for alerting them and promised to come and retrieve her as soon as possible. I assume they were successful in getting her back home, but I haven't heard anything since. Hello, everyone. My wedding was a week ago, and regrettably, the only thing that has happened since then is turmoil. Since the last time I spoke with her parents, neither my girlfriend nor her parents had been in contact with me, as I had said. They didn't take her home, which surprised me. When someone knocked on our door 2 nights ago, my wife and I weren't expecting anyone, so we didn't know who it may be because it was so late. My ex pushed by me and entered with her baggage as I opened the door due to my error of opening it before checking the cameras. When my ex entered the room, my wife, who was seated on the couch, actually sprung to her feet. Just as I was about to ask her why she was in my home, she informed me that she was always going to be here. She informed me that her parents had arrived a few days before to take her home, but she had refused to go because she knew I would be picking her up shortly. All of this seemed so bizarre that my wife and I were in disbelief and unsure of how to respond. She informed me that she had a heated argument with her parents and ultimately stayed at the hotel when they attempted to make it return with them. She decided to move in with me as she was now out of money. She reasoned that if we spent enough time together again, it may bring back memories of the past and make me fall in love with her again. The scenario was so bizarre that I was completely confused and unsure of how to respond. My wife made an effort to talk to her, but she completely disregarded her and kept talking to me, pleading with me to allow her to live with us. I gently informed Rose that I was now married and that she couldn't simply move in with me. However, she said that she didn't approve of the wedding, thus, in her opinion, I was still single. She seemed really unstable, and I thought she needed assistance, so even though I couldn't believe this was happening, I also didn't have the heart to throw her out. I set her down and instructed her to wait in the living room while my wife and I went to the bedroom to decide what to do next. Fortunately, my wife was also quite understanding, and saw that my ex's behavior was rather strange. We saw that she needs significant expert assistance. I attempted to contact her parents, but they refused to answer my calls or texts, stating that she was obviously too insane to live with them and that they could no longer make her return. It was her own now. Her parents were clearly ashamed of her, and it was depressing to see how willing they were to leave their own daughter when they became aware of her problems, with no other choice. I responded by calling my own parents, who showed up in less than 30 minutes. The good news was that my ex had slept off on the couch in the meanwhile. When my parents arrived, we made the decision to get her to a therapist right away, since we weren't sure what she would be able to do given her recent behavior. Since the whole thing was so depressing, my wife and I decided to let her stay that night since, to be honest, we couldn't force ourselves to dislike her anymore. She obviously needed to be treated as soon as possible since something had suddenly occurred to her. Furthermore, the impoverished woman had lost even her parents as a source of support. The following day, when my parents and I accompanied her to the hospital, she was still talking endlessly about how happy she was that I was at last getting well and had even begun organising our wedding. Despite several difficulties and issues, she steadfastly refused to see a mental health expert even when we brought her to one. Eventually, the physicians used medication, drugs I can't remember the names of, to help her relax. It seemed like she was more calmer after the procedure. It took her a few hours to eventually say that she wanted to go home. After I took her home, my family and I sat in the living room discussing our next course of action while letting her sleep in the room. When she declared that she was ready to go home, my wife and I were quite relieved and even assisted her in packing the items in our car's trunk. Together we took the car home. She didn't say anything during the experience, which left us speechless in such a trying circumstance. When she got home, she told us both how sorry she was for the trouble she had created and how ashamed she was of everything that had happened. Throughout the encounter, my wife and I felt uncomfortable, but we told her it was all right and suggested that she put herself first before returning home. I called my ex's mother and told her everything that had transpired, even though I wasn't sure whether it would be helpful. And I suppose that's what eventually made them see how serious the situation was. She informed me she had moved in with her daughter and promised to keep us informed. And my wife and I sincerely hope she recovers, regardless of what has transpired thus far.